are not having a peaceful transition. But with us and keep us to help us live in a way beginning unto you, we ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Oh. Why is that? I'm gone just 1 week, and look what.
It's Sam's fault.
It's Sam's fault. Oh, look, I didn't turn it on.
Jack's fault. Get it trained all over.
Okay, so when we look at Hebrews, we're in this section where he just introduced in chapter 8 that God promised he would make a new covenant. And when we look at some of the words from that covenant, and that's going to be quoting out of Jeremiah 31, but we'll see right here, he says, they're not going to teach his fellow citizen and everyone his brother saying, know the Lord, because they're all going to know me. This is in chapter 8, verse 11. Then in verse 12, he says, this is the reason that they'll know me, because I will be merciful to them, their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more. By virtue of coming to God in this new covenant, we become as holy as he is. And because we have to be holy just to approach him. And that holiness is by no doing of our own, because God's the one that says, I'll be merciful, and their sins I won't remember. It's as if they have never happened before. And of course, when he said a new covenant, he made the first one obsolete. It's going away. It's of no value or in effect. Now, we're writing, the writer is speaking to Hebrew Christians that come out of the Jewish tradition, and they're being tempted to go back. And he says, what are you going to go back to? Because everything we have here is better. And if you go back, there's no longer any forgiveness of sins. And really, the old covenant is going to be done away with. So, chapter 9 talks about Jesus being a better high priest, but he starts by looking at the old tabernacle and then showing how Jesus is a better sacrifice, and then it'll lead into the better covenant. And so remember, we saw that everything in the Old Testament is a blank of what?
Shadow.
A shadow. That's a copy or a shadow. Now, what is the real thing? The shadow or the thing that casts the shadow?
The thing that casts the shadow.
All right, exactly. So we have physical things in the world that are physical pictures of our spiritual reality. All right? And so if you have our earthly tabernacle, what do we also have then? A heavenly one. And that's what he'll talk about. Which is better? The one that's the shadow or the real? Well, obviously the one in heaven. And so he'll be talking about that. Now, verse 1, and Sam went through all this. The first covenant had regulations. In other words, he ordered everything about the size, the furniture, and he went through there and described these things that are all a picture of our reality. For example, when you look at the altar sacrifice, you know, what happened there spiritually? What sacrifice was offered spiritually? Well, Jesus, all right, a better sacrifice, okay? But even the dimensions were spelled out. There's this great veil, and what did this veil separate? What room from what room? Holy place from the most holy. Now, whose presence dwelt in the most holy place? God. What else was in there? The Ark of the Covenant with a mercy seat, and then once a year, on the Day of Atonement, who would go in there?
The high priest.
High priest, all right? And he would sprinkle blood on the mercy seat to make propitiation for the sins of the people. All right? Now, before he did that, he'd have 2 goats. Did you talk about this? All right. 2 goats, and with a flip of a coin, and they cast lots, they'd place his hands on one goat and send it out in the wilderness, and it was called the what?
Scapegoat.
Oh, yeah, you guys are good. That's where the scapegoat term comes from. All the sins were transferred in, and it was sent out in the wilderness. It's like God doesn't see them anymore. And the other goat was sacrificed. The blood was taken and sprinkled on the mercy seat, because without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness. Well, why blood? As people might ask, look at the Old Testament, why so much blood? Why is this so gory? There were literally thousands and thousands of animals every year slaughtered, and it's not a pretty picture. If you ever slaughtered an animal and bled it out, it's not a pretty picture. And then they're throwing some of the parts up on this altar that's burning. It smelled not just like a barbecue, but it was just kind of a gruesome thing. Well, why? Well, chapter 9 is going to deal with some of that in chapter 10. And it requires us to have some kind of understanding of the Old Testament law. And too bad we just can't rehearse it all, but we'll just appeal to some of it. But if you were a Jew, would you understand everything about sacrifice and all the multiple sacrifices for different sins?
Yeah.
And so he's writing to them with that mindset and background, so it'd be easy for them to understand. It'll be challenging somewhat to us. We're just trying to make sense of it, though. Okay? Now, the anointing priest in Leviticus chapter 4, if he sins, I want you to know he brings guilt on the whole people. There's something about the high priest. He wasn't supposed to drink wine or strong drink. Other people could. He couldn't marry a widow. Was there anything sinful about marrying a widow? Why couldn't he marry a widow? There's only one reason. Yeah, but why? Why can't he marry a widow? There's only one reason.
Because his attention would be there.
No, he can marry a virgin, but not a widow. Well, why couldn't he drink wine and strong drink where they said other people couldn't? It's all about his position. He's approaching the Holy God. And you don't participate in the common. You weren't even allowed to bury your parents if you were a high priest. Was it sinful to bury your parents? No, but when you touched a dead person, what did that make you? Unclean. Now, a priest could bury his parents, the high priest could not. Because of his position, he's approaching God. See how serious this was to them? Some said that he'd wear a little bell, and so he went in there, and, they'd carry a string or a rope, and if he was in there too long, they'd pull him out because they're afraid that he died or something. It was so serious. You go in and do the job, and then you get out because you're approaching the living God. Now, this is just what? A copy. Where's the real thing? Heaven. But if this was that serious, not even to speak of how amazing, I'm talking about the permanent temple too. But Hebrews 9 is saying, we've got something so much better. A better high priest and a better sacrifice. Now there's kind of the build-up to where he is. And again, I thank Sam. Notice the old sacrifices in the tabernacle, they couldn't deal with the conscience, right? And that's where we're going to see the difference. Because when Christ appeared in verse 11 and 12, this is where he left off, correct? When Christ appeared, that's an interesting word, as a high priest of the good things to come, we want to kind of identify the good things. He entered to the greater and more perfect tabernacle. Which one would that be? Well, yes. And so, not made with hands, that's your first clue. That is to say, not of this world or creation, and not through the blood of bulls and goats, but through his own blood. He entered the holy place. Where is that? The very presence of God. Now, this is not where God actually dwelt. His eyes were just upon the earthly one. Here he's talking about the actual presence of God himself. He entered into it once and for all, having obtained eternal redemption. Now, I like to talk about a lot of things, but look at the old covenant. Man-made, the new one, what? Perfect, and then what it says, a perfect tabernacle in heaven, God made, right? The old covenant sacrificed goats and calves. The new covenant, the creator of the world, the Son of God. Did he have to do it? Or did he choose to do it? He said, no one takes my life, but I give it up. said, I have authority to do so. He's offering himself as a sacrifice of worship. The old covenant, how often did they go in to make atonement for sins?
Once a year.
Every year. And here it says what? Once for all. All times, all people. Notice, this was temporary, and we're going to address that. And actually, it wasn't even temporary. This is eternal redemption. That word redemption is the idea of ransom or buying back. So when you look at things, the person's better. We're not talking about a high priest who was fraught with sin in himself, who was subject to dying, had temptations like you and I. We're talking about the person's much superior. It's Jesus, the creator of the heavens and the earth, without sin. And notice not only that, notice how precious it is. This is the blood of a goat. How precious is that blood? Anytime you kill something, there should be some solemnity. Is that a good word? Did I make it up? Solemnness about the occasion, because you're taking what?
A life.
A life. But it's just the life of a goat. And how precious this is the blood of Jesus Christ. Now, first of all, let's ask this. Can Jesus die? This is a trick question. If Jesus is God, can God die? No. But that's why he took on flesh and blood. Chapter 2 of Hebrews. Because we, the children, partake of flesh and blood. He had to partake flesh and blood so that he could die. And then when he died, he entered the Hadean realm. But since he was God, it couldn't contain him. It couldn't, because he's God still. And it couldn't overcome him. And so he couldn't be abandoned. And he overcame death itself. And so notice, though, the power of his sacrifice. It's for everybody, for all times. I mean, they talk about new improved tie or a super cleaner. How powerful is his blood? And you say, well, I don't understand how blood can cure anything. Well, we'll try to address some of that. Yes?
Well, that's why when he died, the veil in the temple was torn.
Yes.
Exposing the Holy of Holies.
Yes.
Sort of symbolically indicating it's no longer here. The Holy of Holies is no longer on earth. It's when it went up with him into heaven.
Well, I never thought that way. Mostly that it demonstrates there's a new and living way to the presence of God. But you're right, because, yes. The last thing is the permanence. It's eternal. We don't have to do it year after year. I mean, it's not probationary forgiveness. It's not being a child of God on a trial basis, and if it works out, we'll keep you. It's eternal redemption, and Satan is powerless to get you back. Now, would you want to go back? The old law? No, it's so much, much, much better. And that's what you and I experience. These are the better things, of good things to come that we experience right now. Now, there's where we are. And so we look at verse 13. Let's read and we'll talk about it. So Hebrews chapter 9, I'll get there. In verse 13. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer, that would be a red heifer, we'll maybe talk a little bit about that, sprinkled those who have been defiled, sanctified for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? And for this reason, he, the mediator of a new covenant, in order that since a death has taken place for the redemption of the transgression that were committed under the first covenant, those who have been called may receive the promise of eternal inheritance. Now, we'll stop there, and it makes sense because then he's going to talk about the covenant and how someone has to die. So here we see the blood of bulls and goats. What did it cleanse in that verse? I'm sorry? No, the first verse, what does it say? The flesh. That's contrasted with the blood of Christ. What does it cleanse? All right, so if you touched a bone by accident, you're defiled. There was a process in which you could become clean. You go to the priest. Now, I'll talk just briefly about, I think I have a thing up here, the red heifer. A red heifer, in fact, they're waiting for one now so they can cleanse the temple, so they can occupy the temple mount once again, because it's unclean, and a Jew, and they're thinking today, can't go to the temple mount. They don't understand this is all done away with anyway, but that's how they're still thinking. So if they find a red heifer, they can sacrifice it, burn it, and its ashes mixed with water can cleanse things. Now, I've heard there's only been a few red heifers throughout the history of the Jewish nation, but when you have all this ashes, it just takes the littlest bit with some water, and that water is now can purify things. So if you go to the priest, or if your house become unclean because someone died in it, they'd cleanse it and purify it with the ashes of the red heifer, or this water sprinkled. This is going on all the time because you had to be holy to approach God. Now, that didn't make you holy, but it was teaching them the principle of holiness. Now, all it did after someone was defiled, it just made them clean. He talks about outward. Outward. Now, exactly. Now, when the blood of Christ, through the Spirit, offered himself, in other words, it wasn't taken, he wasn't murdered. Well, yes, they did murder him from the world's point of view, but he offered himself. That's why he didn't resist, right? That's why he didn't fight back. He offered himself. Yes?
Pilate said, I have the power to release you, and Jesus said, you have no power at all unless God give it to you.
Exactly. He said, you're powerless. This is out of your hands. Exactly. He can cleanse your conscience. Now, did you talk about this much?
A little bit, yes.
All right. What consciousness is being cleansed here? Cleansed here? Someone help me. Yes.
Self-knowledge about my sin.
There you go. That's basically it. We all feel unworthy. Why? Because we are. Who's worthy to approach the living God? We're going to demonstrate that in a second. The answer is no one. So, okay, I got forgiveness, but then who lives perfectly since the day you became a Christian? Dare raise your hand? And that torments us. Paul said, who's going to deliver this wicked man that I am? Because he said, I do the very thing that I hate. I mean, the willingness to do good is in me, but I do the very opposite. He says, who's going to deliver me? And he says, Jesus Christ. So what cleanses our conscience of all our guilt and makes us so we can approach God?
A relationship with Christ.
Well, it's the blood.
Yeah.
It's the blood. Well, why the blood? Why the blood? We're going to try to answer that. But that's the promise here. Now, that's the outward man. Of course, the conscience is dealing with the inward man. And from the very beginning, God's trying to deal with this spiritually. And we are spirit beings with a physical body, but we think too often just physical, right? And so when we look at this, there's got to be a sacrifice and substitution. So we'll look at that as we go through here. So now we get up to verse 15. This is all about the way into the holy place. 7 times in this chapter alone, it talks about the way into the holy place. Who would enter the holy place? The high priest. Who's our high priest? Jesus. Is he going to lead you and I into the holy place? That's what's amazing. In the spiritual, true temple, we all get to enter into the presence of God. And that's what we're going to demonstrate here. Like, well, who could do that? When only the high priest, and he had to do all this cleansing. It took 7 days sometimes to cleanse people. And he was in there just a little while, got out before he died in the presence of God. Who's got the arrogance to think that you could approach the living God? When in Christ we have a new and living way. We can actually approach God himself. That's why it's so much better.
Does that connect at all to, in Revelation, where it talks that no one was worthy to open the seals, and then all of the lamb, the slain lamb came, and he was worthy?
I think that's different, because even all the angelic beings and the martyred saints, there's no one worthy except the Son. So that's just a little different, because he has all authority and power. All right. Holiness. Let's talk about it first of all. The word holy means set apart from the world. It's a characteristic of our God. It's part of the divine nature. God is light. Don't we read that? In him there is no darkness whatsoever. It's an attribute of him. The Hebrew word denotes that state of which belongs to the sphere of the sacred. So it's something that's universally or his. It's inherent in who he is. God, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Now man, on the other hand, is just full of sin. So we're called unholy. And if it's not in action, it's in our thought. Because sin all starts in the thought, doesn't it? Jesus said, if you are angry at your brother, you're already guilty of murder. You know, it's out of the heart comes all these things. It's what he says. So this state of holiness requires entire freedom from moral evil as well as moral perfection. What's the difference between moral evil and moral perfection? It's not a good I'm just quoting some things I've found for you. Moral evil is what? Doing things that are... What's moral perfection? Doing those things which are right. Now, does God prescribe both? Don't do this, but make sure you do that. So if you see a brother in need, would it be wrong to walk on the other side of the street and avoid him? That's sinful. Because a loving God would always rush to their aid. Isn't that what he did? He sent his son, rushed to our aid. So sometimes we define holiness, I didn't do anything bad today. Well, that's a good start. Now you're at ground zero. My question is, or question is, what did you do right today? Isn't that more important? In fact, if you do right, you don't have time to do bad. You can't live in a vacuum and do nothing. God always does the right thing, doesn't he? Always. 100% use of his time and his energy and power in a loving, judicious. No man can see God and it's because of his holiness and our lack of it. And so if I'm going to be holy, the next question is, what am I going to do to get that? There's nothing. You say, well, I don't understand. How come? All right, so has anyone got their credit card bill lately? And you look at it like, oh no, I'm in trouble. And it started out just charge a little bit, and the next month a little bit more. The end of the year, you're way behind. You're paying minimum payments, right? They love doing that. So the interest is more than the payment. So pretty soon it just starts getting higher and higher and higher, right? Now sin is like credit card debt that you can't pay. Because once you charge the sin, you're in debt. We say guilty, but you have to pay up. You know, they say with criminals, if you play, you got to pay, right? It's the same type of thing that if you sin, God said, I can't. I want to, but I can't. And then, of course, on top of it, our sin just keeps piling up. That's the condition of all this, yes? There's no way we can pay it off. Now, some people think, well, we'll look at this. Behold, Isaiah 59. He said, the problem is that God can't hear you, talking to the Jews. It's not that his hand is short, his ear is dull. He said, but your sins or iniquities have made a separation between you and God. So man and God used to have a relationship. They walked in the garden, sin into the world, and it separated the two. That's called death. Spiritual death. Right? Ephesians chapter 2. You were dead in your iniquities. But God, because of his mercy, made you alive. Death spiritually is what's more important than death physically. All right? And so here, man and God, if we want to enter the holy place, we got to find some way to be holy again. And that's where blood comes in. That's where blood comes in. Leviticus chapter 17, it says, the life of flesh is in the blood. Now, is that physically true? When you
Yes.
study biochemistry and blood and all that. It's amazing, how God designed the body. Imagine that. That the blood just carries all the life. It takes oxygen and nutrients, and it takes away all the waste. And it's so complicated. And I have my iPhone, on my phone, a picture, and I should have put it up. All the mechanisms that have to be in place at one time for blood to clot. And it's just this amazing chart that's so complicated, I should have had it up there for you to see. But they all have to be at the right time. There's no way it can evolve. It's just so designed. And if your blood doesn't clot, what happens to you? You bleed out and you die. That's what they do to animals. Can you imagine they used to heal people by bleeding them? You got too much blood, Bruce. Let's get rid of some. That's what they actually did. But that's why you weren't supposed to drink blood in the Old Testament. And you couldn't strangle animals because that'd leave the blood in them. You had to cut them and let them bleed out because life is in the blood. And when life is taken, blood is taken. They expire, they die. There's something about the power of blood that it's redeeming. Not the blood of animals, but the blood of Christ. So we're going to see the Son of Man came not to be served, but to give his life as a ransom. Notice, remember he said in Christ we have good things. He said eternal redemption. That word means ransom, to buy back. That was this whole job of Jesus Christ. And 1 Timothy says there's one God and one mediator between God and man. What's a mediator? A go-between. So Paul and I are having a real bad fight. Now, Bruce and Paul are having a real bad fight. And they're not talking to each other. And then someone says, hey, Brad, could you mediate between the two? So he's big and tall. I said, all right, stay away. I'm going to stand. Now, what's your problem, Bruce, with Paul? And Paul goes, and then he negotiates and mediates and brings the two together and become friends again. Now, he won't talk to Paul, but he will talk to Paul through Brad. You see that? And Paul won't talk to Bruce because he's bad at him, but he will talk to Brad, and Brad can relay the message. Can any of us approach God? Enter the holy place by yourself. We need a what? Mediator. There's one mediator between God and man. It's Jesus Christ who gave himself as a ransom. Oh, the same word right there, ransom. Well, when he gave his ransom, we know that means he died on the cross and shed his blood. Life is in where? The blood. We're not talking about the blood of man. Let's just talk about that. Blood of a goat, blood of a man, which is more valuable? Obviously the man. Now let's talk about the blood of man and the blood of the Creator, the heavens and the earth. How valuable is that blood? Sinless and pure. That's his blood. And life is in the blood. So he's the mediator of a new covenant in order that since the death has taken place for the redemption of the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant, those who have been called may receive the eternal promise. Promise of eternal inheritance. So here we have Christ on the cross, and he dies. And the question might be, okay, in Christ we have forgiveness of our sins, correct? Well, what about all those people that came out of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob? We're talking about the Jewish nation, right? What about these Jews? How did they find forgiveness? Because remember, Abraham, in Genesis 15:6, it says, does anyone know? When God pointed the stars, said that's how many children you're going to have. Someone please say this verse. Someone that's in my class. Well, I've been a failure for 18 years. He took him outside and said, look at all those stars. That's how many children you're going to have. And it said, Abraham what?
Believed God and reckoned his righteousness.
He believed God, and God counted, that's an accounting term, he counted his faith as what?
Righteous.
You're righteous. That means holy. Whoa, 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 you're still a sinner. What does this verse say? What does it say in verse 15? What's the answer? No, you're missing it. What did he redeem? The transgressions committed where?
The first covenant.
The first covenant. That's all the way from here to here, and it is going to include everyone from beginning to time. So the blood goes backwards, if you would,
And forward.
as well as going forward. God said, I'm going to make you righteous because if you have faith in who I am, I got you covered. Now, at that time, could God just say, don't worry about it, we'll just act like it never happened. I'll remember your sin no more. Could he do that?
No,
Why?
this devil is there always accusing.
Well, that's one reason, and he has a legitimate claim. Why could God not do that, though? You're right.
But he's
He's
right.
just. Justice demands punishment.
Price.
Wrath. Right? That's why he said in the old law, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, a life for a life. So God can't just arbitrarily say, Abraham, I got you, don't worry about it, we'll act like it never happened. God had in his mind, I'm going to take care of it someday with the most grievous, terrible sacrifice man has ever seen, my own son. Not just Abraham, but every Jew that lived that had that same trait. Yes?
Well, I think there's a sense in which you're right. But I think there's also a sense in which God is not bound by time.
Exactly.
So God says, Abraham, you're righteous, my son died.
Yes.
And he can talk about the future as if it were the past.
Exactly.
But Abraham has a hard time understanding that
That's right.
because Abraham can't do it.
Did you understand what he said? Because God lives in the past and the future, so when he said you're righteous, it's as if this already happened. From our earthly perspective, it talks about committed past tense under the first covenant. We're looking back, but God doesn't. That's a good observation. All right? So notice as we look at that, I'll get to that later. Here is the chart I just had there. You have these high priests every day making sacrifices for 1 year. Did they actually forgive the sin?
No, just rolled it forward.
We use this phrase rolled forward because it rolled forward, now you know I don't cite that here, until the next year they had to do it again, and again, and again, and again. And finally, Jesus offered himself, and all those sins for all those years fell on him. He who knew no sin became sin on our behalf, so that we might partake of his righteousness. Now we're holy as he is holy. Now, that's what it is. Transgressions were committed in the first covenant, fell upon the cross. He's our mediator. And so now we can enter into the holy place through Jesus Christ. And you have to understand that, how holy we are. You say, well, I don't feel holy. I don't feel worthy. Well, first of all, you're not worthy. Yes, you should be guilty, but he's taken care of that, and he wants us to believe in him when he says that. I will remember your sins no more. Just like that goat took off in the wilderness, and God said, I don't see the sins anymore. They're all in that goat, and he's not in my presence. When your sins fell on Christ, does he see your sins ever again?
No.
So let's forget about them, because he forgot. Yes, JC.
I don't know if I'm getting too deep in the weeds here, but now the way that I've always understood it is that Old Testament essentially nobody went to heaven. They went to
That waiting place? Yeah.
And so that was part of this whole plan was Jesus taking on those sins, allowing to enter the Hadean realm and take those who were reserved
Yeah.
to heaven with him.
I
Did
think-
Jews at the time understand that concept?
I think with this understanding, if we did that sidebar discussion, that gives more credibility to that point of view. They had to be in that holding tank, if you would, because Christ hadn't died for the forgiveness, but God's still taking care of them. But when he died, he led captivity captive. And now they're forgiven, they're before the throne of God. After the cross, no one goes to that place. They go right. Yes, I think it's credibility.
But it makes even more of that, you know.
You would understand why.
It unlocks further why Jesus is better, because without him, your people would still be in that medium.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, go ahead.
Well, what about the Mount of Transfiguration when Moses and Elijah were there with Jesus? Jesus hadn't died yet,
Right,
but yet they appeared with him.
right.
And so, where were they?
Well, they had to be with Abraham's bosom too, and they had to go back there until Christ died. That's the only answer you can give, right? Notice Romans 3, God displayed publicly as a propitiation, that's appeasing his wrath by blood on the mercy seat. Through his blood, Jesus' blood, through our faith, this was to demonstrate his righteousness, because he had to take care of sin. He couldn't just ignore it, he had to deal with it. It's that credit card debt, someone's got to pay it. Because in the forbearance, that means he what? This is how he dealt with those sins. It's called what? Forbearance. He passed over the sins. We say he rolled them forward. Did he ignore them?
No.
Did he tolerate them? We preach tolerance today.
No.
Did he tolerate them? No, he can't even look on evil. It's forbearance. What does that mean? What's the word forbearance mean?
Put up with it.
All right.
We're not gonna deal with it right now.
It's like, it's characteristic with your children. Like you're going through these terrible twos. I'll forbear because I'm looking for the day you grow out of them. Right? But we'll deal with those sins. We'll deal with the problem. And that's God's attitude, is forbearance. And thank you, God, for forbearance, because what could he have done righteously to every person that sinned when they sinned? What could he have done righteously?
Destroyed.
That's it, you're done. Ananias for fire. Done. It's over. But because of his love and mercy, he showed forbearance, and he passed over the sins previously committed.
Passing over, you need the blood of the lamb to do, so
Yes.
it all connects back to the same.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. All right, so now we're going to get into discussion, and verse 16, I got to go to 28. They have 5 minutes. So let's take a vote. Should I go through 12 verses in 5 minutes, or should I wait till next week? Next week? Or 5 minutes? Cheers, Jesus. Okay, let's introduce it, and then we'll talk about it in detail next week.
That's a go-between.
That's right. I'm mediating between Jerry Sue and the rest of you. So we're in verse 16. For where a covenant is, there must of necessity be the death of the one who made it. Because a covenant, verse 17, is valid only when men are dead, for it's never enforced when the one who made it lives. Now, we have to understand what he's talking about here when he says this. A testament demands death. Notice they use the word testament rather than covenant. And that's from this chart right here. We all know what a last will and testament is. Now, a lot of stupid younger people often don't. Or they don't know what it is. A last will and testament. A testament is a contract, it's agreement. Who writes it up?
You.
The person.
It's called, the person who writes it up is called the testator. Now, does he talk to his family like, could you help me come to agreement who gets what?
No.
Who decides who gets what in the last will? The testator. That person. And what if the kids don't like it?
Too bad.
Tough. Right? I mean, that's the way it is. I know they sue afterwards. It's irrevocable, it's supposed to be. If it's executed correctly, it's irrevocable. You can't change it once a person dies. Now, up until that time, can he take people off and put people on?
Yes.
Can he change?
Yes.
All right. He gets to do it. Now, who is the person that receives the benefits of the last testament? We call him the beneficiary. Benny. All right? Alright? And then who, after he dies, makes sure his will is carried out? What's that person called? Not the executor, the executor. Alright, we're not executing anyone, alright? It's the executor of this estate or the will. Now, the reason I say this is because there's two words in the New Testament that's used for covenant. The traditional word is an agreement made between two people. This word is actually testament. It speaks of one person initiating his will, and you don't have a choice about the terms. You can either be part of it or not. And that's what he says here. So real quickly, who is the testator in this will? Jesus or God? Yeah. Who's the beneficiary? Those who come to him in faith, who are called. We'll see that. It's you and me. Now, as long as he's living, can he change it? Can he excuse the thief on the cross as long as he's alive? Oh, yeah. But once he dies, is his law in place? And if you want to be forgiven, what do you got to do? Have faith, repent, be baptized. Because once he dies, it's set. No one can change it. People try and change it all the time.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Now, what I want you to do, come back next week, we're going to talk about who's the executor of this estate. And we'll talk about why this second covenant, the new covenant, is so superior. And I just introduce it so you know the people and terms involved. All right? Come back next week and we'll talk about that and finish the chapter.